After 80, life doesn't just change on the outside, it changes on the inside too. And no, I'm not talking about physical aches, pills, or medical checkups. I'm talking about another kind of changes, quieter, deeper. The ones you feel when the world starts treating you differently, when your memories weigh more than your plans, when the body no longer warns before it fails, and the soul starts asking for other things. The hardest part is that no one prepares you for that, because although everyone ages, few speak honestly about what happens after 80. Has it happened to you that you feel the world shrinking, or that your voice no longer carries the weight it once had? Have you looked in the mirror and felt that you are still you, but that something changed and you don't know how to explain it? You're not alone, and you're not broken. What you're living, thousands have lived. Only no one dared to put it into words, until now. Today, I want to talk to you about those truths that come with the years, even if no one names them. Truths that, if you face them, can help you recover something you may have lost. Your strength. Don't skip or fast forward anything, because this isn't a video to sadden you. It's one to help you see with more clarity, so that even now you can say, this stage is also mine, and I still have things to live for. Let's begin. First truth, the silent reduction of the social world. After 80, the world begins to grow quiet. At first, you don't notice. The visits that used to be frequent become spaced out. The calls which once lasted an hour are now brief, almost out of obligation. And there are days, more and more of them, when the phone doesn't ring at all. Not a single voice, not a single laugh. Only the distant noise of the neighborhood, the ticking of the clock, and your own body breathing. The strangest part is that it doesn't arrive with drama. It's not a sudden abandonment. There are no farewells. It simply happens. Friends fall ill or pass away. Family gets caught up in their own lives. And you remain there with your routines, your memories, and your favorite chair. The same as always, but quieter than ever. I know Carmen, an 84-year-old woman, who told me something that stayed with me. She said, my house didn't become emptier. I was the one who started hearing the emptiness that had always been there. Only before, I didn't have time to notice it. Carmen had been a teacher, very active, always surrounded by people. But now her days went by in long pauses between a novel, a short walk, and the wait for the next Sunday, which might bring a visit, or might not. One day, while folding clothes, Carmen stopped and thought, who do I talk to every day? And she didn't know how to answer, sometimes with the neighbor when they crossed paths, or with her granddaughter if she replied to her message. But those were brief exchanges, like drops barely touching the surface. Nothing like the conversations that one stretched on without glancing at the clock. And so she began writing letters, not to send them, but to unburden herself. Letters to her late husband, to a friend who had moved away, even to her younger self from 30 years ago. She told me that, in doing so, something inside her calmed. That it wasn't just the company she missed, but the feeling of being listened to, understood. And that by speaking to the paper, she discovered she still had much to say, even if there weren't many people left to listen. Old age doesn't always bring loneliness, but it does bring a kind of silence that's hard to explain. It's not the silence of being alone, but of not being expected. Of not being at the center of anyone's plans. It's not that you're unloved, it's that life goes on for others, while for you it slows down. And here lies the big difference. Loneliness hurts, but silence can be transformed. It can be a punishment or a peace. It all depends on how you look at it. Have you noticed how different the day feels when someone calls just to chat? Or how the heart feels when a conversation flows without hurry? Maybe you don't talk to many people each day, but who do you truly connect with? Older adults don't seek noise, they seek meaning. An honest talk, a gaze that doesn't rush, a listening ear that doesn't interrupt. Sometimes, One single person speaking to you with kindness is worth more than 100 asking how you are out of obligation. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote, "A man's life is what his thoughts make of it, and in old age, when the outer world grows quiet, what happens inside becomes even more important. That's why it's vital to care not only for your bonds with others, but also the bond with yourself." Carmen taught me that you don't need a full room to feel accompanied, that a good conversation can happen aloud with a memory or in a notebook where you allow yourself to say what you couldn't at the time. That silence, when accepted and honored, can become a refuge, not a prison. Sometimes what's most missed is not physical company, but the feeling of belonging, of being part of something. That's why if you still have someone to talk to, do it. If you can send a message, send it. And if you don't have anyone, speak to yourself with respect, with tenderness, because you also deserve to listen to yourself. Silence can weigh like a stone if you let it fall on you. But it can also heal like a balm if you use it to reconnect with what you still live, because in the midst of so much silence, life still remains. And that life still has words to say. Just as the evening softens when the sun goes down, old age too can grow brighter if we learn to see the value of each conversation that remains, of each kind gesture, of each sincere listening. The world may become smaller, yes, but that doesn't mean your presence matters less. Sometimes a single voice, your own, is enough to fill an entire space with meaning. Second truth, when a small health problem is no longer small, sometimes it all begins with something minimal, a stumble in the kitchen, a cold that used to go away with a hot soup and a good nap, or even a lapse, not knowing where you left your keys, a word slipping away just when you need it, and you think, bah, it's nothing. But with the years, what used to be nothing begins to leave a mark. The body no longer reacts the same. The flu lasts a week, then 2. The fall that only left a bruise turns into persistent pain. The forgetfulness starts to create doubt. It's not paranoia. It's simply that after 80 the margins become thinner. Take Mario, for example, whom I met at a community center. He's 82. Always very independent, an active man, a tireless walker, the kind who went out every single morning. One day, while stepping off the curb, he twisted his ankle a bit. "Just a minor sprain," he said. He went on with his day as if nothing had happened. But that sprain, which in the past he would have forgotten by evening, started to hurt more. It swelled. He had to stop walking, and when he stopped walking, his spirits began to fade as well. Weeks went by. Losing movement affected his sleep, his mood, even his appetite. "All because I didn't sit down for 5 minutes to put ice on it," he told me later with a bitter smile. "I thought I could handle everything, as always. But this body isn't what it used to be, and not accepting that cost me dearly." There's something very human about wanting to carry on as if nothing has changed, especially when your whole life you've been strong, useful, reliable. But the body changes, not only in what it can do, but in how it reacts, in how it needs to be cared for. What we once ignored now demands attention. What once healed in a day now requires days of rest, medicine, monitoring. And what hurts most isn't just the body, but the pride. Because admitting you need to stop, that you can't do it all, that one bad day affects you more than you'd like, requires humility. And that's hard. Do you give yourself permission to rest when you need it? Or do you push yourself with guilt as if resting were a sin? Many older adults punish themselves for not being able to keep up like before. But the truth is, the body asks for something else. It asks for pauses. It asks for attention. It asks for tenderness. The Stoics said something very simple but profound. What happens to you is not in your control, but how you decide to face it is. In old age, this becomes especially real. You cannot stop the passage of time. You cannot prevent the knee from aching or sleep from becoming lighter. But you can decide how you care for what you still have, how you listen to your body, how you honor what it can still give you. The problem is not the ailment, it's the denial, the stubbornness with which we sometimes carry on as if nothing is wrong, just to avoid feeling vulnerable. But caring for yourself is not weakness. On the contrary, it is wisdom. It is maturity. It is self-love. Think, how many times have you ignored a pain? How many times have you said, "It'll go away," when you knew you needed to stop? The body after 80 is like a garden that has lived through many seasons. It has bloomed, endured storms, borne fruit, but it has also lost leaves. And now, more than ever, it needs gentle and constant care. It's not enough to water it once. It needs to be observed, touched with care, shielded from too much sun or too much cold. And the most beautiful part is that when you do, the body responds. Maybe you can't run anymore, but you can walk. Maybe you can't carry heavy bags, but you can embrace. Maybe fatigue comes sooner, but calm also comes, if you know when to stop in time. Mario, after his sprain, began going to physical therapy. At first he complained. "This is useless," he said. But little by little, he regained his balance. He went back to walking down his street, slower, yes, but with new awareness. He once told me, "Now I walk as if my body were a small child, with care, with attention, because I want it to last and because I finally understood that I can't treat it as if it were invincible." That phrase stuck with me, because many older adults don't need more strength. They need more patience, more compassion with themselves. It's not about giving up, but about respecting new limits, about understanding that self-care is not the end of living, but living with more intelligence. So if today you feel something is wrong, don't ignore it. Don't punish yourself for needing help. Don't compare yourself to who you were 30 years ago. That person already did their part. Now it's your turn to take care of what remains, which is still valuable, which is still your home. The body at this age no longer asks to be pushed. It asks to be listened to be embraced, to be protected even from yourself. Because sometimes the body's worst enemy is not illness, but the pride of the one who inhabits it. And if one day you have to stay in bed, if a medicine makes you tired, if a fall forces you to stop for weeks, don't blame yourself. Don't feel less because of it. Remember that even the most beautiful gardens need seasons of rest to bloom again. Care for your body as you would a rosebush in winter. Don't demand flowers all year long. Wrap it, protect it, and trust that with the right care, it can still keep giving you life. Third truth, the feeling of becoming invisible. Sometimes invisibility doesn't arrive all at once. It's not like switching off a light. It's more like the world slowly turning down the volume of your presence, little by little, without anyone saying it out loud. Clara, an 84-year-old woman, noticed it for the first time at a family gathering. Everyone was sitting around the table. They talked, laughed, interrupted each other. She, with her cup of tea in her hand, listened attentively, waiting for a moment to tell a funny story from her youth, something related to what her grandchildren were talking about. When she finally opened her mouth, no one looked at her. She began the sentence. No one stopped. Someone changed the subject. Another got up for more coffee, and her story was left unfinished, as if it had vanished into the air. It wasn't the first time, but that afternoon she felt it more strongly, as if her voice no longer had weight, as if her presence no longer moved anything in the room. It wasn't disdain, it wasn't cruelty, it was something else, more subtle, the forgetting that she was still there. Has something like this ever happened to you? Have you felt that you are there, but they don't see you? That you speak, but they don't listen? Not out of bad intentions, but because, without meaning to, the world starts looking the other way. At this stage of life, many people experience this feeling. It's not that one wants to be the center of attention. It's simply that it hurts when your voice no longer has the echo it once had. When you walk into a store and the clerk speaks only to your son. When you ask for something and they interrupt you. When you give an opinion and it seems as if the room doesn't register it. And it's not something people say out loud. In fact, sometimes it's embarrassing to admit it because you think, I don't want to seem needy for attention. I don't want to bother. But it's not about that. It's about dignity, about being seen, about being recognized as someone who is still alive, with history, with thoughts, with worth. Culturally, the modern world has an obsession with what is new, fast, young. And in that frenzy, old age seems to get in the way, not because it lacks beauty, but because it reminds the world of things it wants to forget, the passage of time, slowness, depth, and so without realizing it, we stop looking at those who have lived the most. We treat them as if they had nothing left to say, as if their stories no longer mattered, as if they had already been enough. But who decides when a story no longer deserves to be told? Who has the right to silence a voice that has survived so much? If today you could tell a story from your life, who would you tell it to? Who would sit with you, without looking at the clock, just to listen to you attentively? The truth is that every older adult is an open book, full of chapters written with pain, with humor, with courage. Every wrinkle holds an anecdote, every silence a choice. But if no one opens that book, if no one asks, if no one listens, then that wisdom stays alone, forgotten on an invisible shelf. And you should not carry that loneliness, because your life matters, your experience matters. What you have lived is valuable, even if the world has become too noisy to notice. The Stoics spoke of virtue as the only thing that remains, and among those virtues is wisdom. Not the kind from books, but the kind earned through years, through mistakes, through grief, through lessons that no school teaches. You have that wisdom, and you have the right to share it. That's why, even if the world seems to spin without looking at you, don't fade away. Even if the conversation passes over you, don't stay silent. Keep saying what you think. Keep telling your stories, because there will always be someone who listens. Maybe not everyone, maybe not always, but someone will, and that is enough. Not long ago, Clara told me she had started writing her memoirs, not to publish them, not to become famous, just to leave something. If one day someone wants to know who I was, I'll be there, she told me, and she said it with the calm of someone who no longer expects the world to see her all the time, but refuses to disappear entirely. That's the difference. It's not resignation. It's a form of silent resistance, leaving a mark even if no one applauds, lighting your light even if few see it, because there are soft lights, yes, lights that don't blind, that don't make noise, but that keep shining night after night, that guide, that care, that remain. You are one of those lights. Don't let anyone extinguish you. Fourth truth. Everyday life becomes smaller. Sometimes you don't realize when it happens. It's so gradual, so quiet, that there's no exact day you can point to. Simply, one day you look at your calendar, if you still use one, and notice that there is more blank space than before. Fewer outings, fewer commitments, fewer routes. Life, which once seemed to unfold, like an entire city waiting to be discovered, now fits into just a few rooms. Pedro, for example, used to be a tireless walker. At 60, he still took the bus and got off wherever curiosity led him. A new bookstore, a shady plaza, a hidden cafe. He had the habit of getting lost a little every week, as he called it. He knew the corners of his city the way one knows a beloved face, with detail, with affection. Today, he is 83, and his most common route is from the bedroom to the living room. Sometimes he dares to walk around the block, but not always. There are days when even that feels far away. The bus stop that used to be 5 minutes away now feels like 20, not because the neighborhood changed, but because his body did. His rhythm changed. Something inside him changed that no longer seeks new streets, but instead tries to feel safe in the ones he already knows. And it's not just about physical fatigue, it's also emotional. There is something in the world that now feels bigger, noisier, faster. Going out is no longer so simple, and so little by little his world became smaller. The armchair by the window became his favorite corner. The radio connects him to the outside. The dining table is his command center. Everything happens there, in that small universe of familiar things. Has something like this happened to you? Have you noticed how certain streets are no longer part of your day? Which spaces did you stop inhabiting without realizing it? What is your territory now? Because yes, at this age, the territory shrinks. What once was neighborhood, city, country becomes living room, kitchen, patio. But this is not a tragedy. It doesn't have to be. Although at first it may feel like a loss, like a closing off, it can also be an opportunity. Because the small can also have depth. Because routine, though repetitive, can also become sacred. Pedro told me something that stayed with me. I used to explore streets, now I explore moments. And it's true. In that small corner where he has his coffee every morning, he learned to listen to the sounds of the day as if they were music, the punctual song of a bird, the gentle tap of a branch against the window, the voice of his neighbor greeting her dog. There is wisdom in learning to live within a smaller geography without feeling diminished by it. It's as if life, instead of expanding outward, began to deepen inward. It's not always easy. There are days when one misses moving more freely, changing, scenery, improvising, and it's valid to acknowledge that, but it's also valuable to ask yourself, how can I make this small world meaningful? How can I make it mine? Maybe now you don't walk through plazas or avenues, but you can walk through your memories. Maybe you don't visit as many cafes, but you can prepare a special one every afternoon, just for yourself. Maybe you don't go into bookstores anymore, but you can return to that book you never finished. Stoic philosophy spoke of inner mastery as true freedom, and this becomes more powerful when the body no longer goes as far. When the environment shrinks, the soul can still keep growing, if given the space, because greatness is not in the size of the map, but in the intensity with which you live what is before you. Breakfast can be a ritual, a brief phone call can be a celebration, a blooming plant can bring you more joy than an entire excursion. At this age, it's not about doing more, it's about doing with more meaning. Pedro redecorated his living room, not out of vanity, but out of respect. If this is going to be my world, I want it to be beautiful, he told me. He changed the curtains, moved the furniture to let in more light, placed a vase with flowers he cut from the garden. Each gesture was a way of dignifying his space, of understanding that the small, the everyday, also deserves beauty, because a small house can become sacred if you inhabit it with gratitude, if you don't see it as a prison, but as a temple. The problem is not that life becomes smaller. The problem is when we stop filling it with meaning. And you, how are you inhabiting your space today? Which corner of your house has become your refuge? What simple moment of the day could you transform into something special? Sometimes limits teach us what truly matters. Sometimes less space is the perfect excuse for more attention, more presence, more calm. Life has not ended. It has only folded back a little, like those flowers that close at night, but remain alive inside, like those small houses where, without knowing it, the greatest warmth is kept. Fifth truth, the unpredictable body. Sometimes mornings deceive you. You wake up feeling light. The knees don't hurt as much, your head is clear, your hands steady. You dress without effort, make breakfast without a sigh, and think, today is a good day. You even dare to walk a little further, maybe organize that drawer you've been postponing for weeks. But the next day, everything changes. The same body that accompanied you with agility yesterday seems to betray you today. Your legs feel heavy, your hands tremble, and there's a slight but constant fog over your mind. Climbing a step feels harder. Tying your shoes feels like an impossible task, and you're not sure why. You didn't do anything differently. You didn't fall. You didn't get sick. It simply changed. This is one of the harshest truths that comes with the years. The body becomes unpredictable. It doesn't respond the same way. It doesn't always give a warning. Sometimes it wakes up fine, other times it seems on strike. And that uncertainty, beyond the physical, touches something much deeper: trust. Luis, for example, I met him in a community center. He's 81 years old, and he used to be very independent, a man active, a passionate walker, the kind who goes out every morning without fail. One day, while getting off the curb, he twisted his ankle a bit. "A sprain, no big deal," he said. He continued his day as if nothing happened, but that sprain, which he would have forgotten about in an afternoon, started to hurt more. It swelled up. He had to stop walking. And as he stopped walking, his mood also began to fade. Weeks went by. Losing movement affected his sleep, his mood, even his appetite. "All because I didn't sit for 5 minutes to put ice on it," he told me with a bitter smile. "I thought I could handle it all, like always. But this body is not the same as before, and not accepting it cost me dearly. There's something very human in wanting to go on as if nothing happened, especially when you've been strong, useful, dependable throughout your life. But the body changes, not only in what it can do, but in how it reacts, in how it needs to be cared for. What we once ignored now requires attention. What used to be solved in one day now demands days of rest, medication, and vigilance. And what hurts the most is not just the body, but the pride. Because accepting that you need to stop, that you can't do everything, that a bad day affects you more than you'd like, requires humility. And that's hard. Do you give yourself permission to rest when you need it? Or do you push yourself with guilt, as if resting were a sin? Many older adults punish themselves for not being able to keep going like before. But the truth is, the body asks for something else. It asks for pauses. It asks for attention. It asks for tenderness. The Stoics said something simple but profound. It's not in your hands what happens to you, but it's in your hands how you decide to face it. In old age, this becomes especially true. You can't stop time, you can't avoid a sore knee or lighter sleep, but you can decide how you care for what you still have, how you listen to your body, how you honor what it can still give you. The problem is not the pain, it's the denial, the stubbornness with which we sometimes carry on as if nothing happened, just to avoid feeling vulnerable. But taking care of oneself is not weakness. On the contrary, it's wisdom, it's maturity, it's self-love. Think, how many times have you ignored a pain? How many times have you said, "It will pass," when you knew you needed to stop? The body after 80 is like a garden that has lived through many seasons. It has bloomed, weathered storms, borne fruit, but it has also lost leaves. And now, more than ever, it needs soft and constant care. You can't just water it once. It needs to be looked at, touched with care, protected from too much sun or cold. And the most beautiful thing is that when you do, the body responds. Maybe you no longer run, but you can walk. Maybe you no longer carry heavy bags, but you can hug. Maybe fatigue comes sooner, but peace also comes if you know when to stop. Luis, after his sprain, started going to physical therapy. At first, he complained. "This isn't doing anything," he said, but little by little, he regained his balance. He went back to walking down. His street, slower, yes, but with a new awareness. He told me once, "Now I walk as if my body were a small child, with care, with attention, because I want it to last, and because I've understood that I can't treat it like it's invincible." That phrase stuck with me, because many older adults don't need more strength, they need more patience, more compassion for themselves. It's not about giving up, but respecting the new limits. Understanding that taking care of yourself is not stopping living, but living with more intelligence. So, if today your body is tired, embrace it. If tomorrow it's agile, enjoy it. But in both cases, don't judge it. Don't demand it to be what it's no longer, because it's still valuable. It's still yours, like that old clock that no longer gives the exact time, but holds history. And with a little attention, oil and pause, it can still mark the most beautiful moments of the day. Third truth, the memory that plays with your recollections. There are days when you don't remember where you left the keys, but you can smell your mother's perfume as if you were still hugging her. It happens to you too, doesn't it? You forget what you ate yesterday, but like a gust, the image of your first love comes back. Or the sound of your child's footsteps running down the hallway, things that seemed dormant, that were back there in time, return with a clarity that astonishes. That's what memory does, especially after 80. It becomes capricious, playful, sometimes bewildering. One day someone greets you on the phone, tells you their name, and you know them, but you can't place them. At the same time, you can recite from memory a song you danced to in 1958. The brain keeps its own secrets, and in old age, those secrets become more apparent. Eleanor, an 84-year-old woman I met recently, told me something very sweet. "I forget my neighbors' faces, but I never forget the sound of my daughter's tricycle wheels in the yard." And as she told me, her eyes shone, because that image, so simple, so old, still lived inside her, like an untouched movie, like a refuge. That's what happens with memories. Some are lost without permission, and others cling to the soul with strength. There is pain in forgetting, of course. There's distress when you can't find a word, when you don't remember why you opened the fridge, or when someone reminds you of a story and you can't reconstruct it. And yet, there's also beauty, memory, when it's no longer. Exact becomes something deeper, an old house where some rooms remain lit. Maybe you can't walk through all the hallways, but there are warm lights that never go out. Has this ever happened to you? What memory returns to you frequently without being called? And which one has left, leaving barely a soft shadow? Old age confronts us with that daily game, remembering and forgetting. And sometimes we demand too much of ourselves. We get frustrated when we forget a date, when we repeat a story, when we can't find the right word when speaking, as if memory should still work like when we were 40. But it doesn't, and it doesn't have to. Remembering isn't a competition. There are no medals for accuracy. At this age, memory becomes a garden of the essentials, and what remains, what returns effortlessly, is often the most important. Elena told me that one afternoon while washing dishes, she remembered in great detail the day her father taught her to swim. She had forgotten what she had eaten that morning, but that scene, the sun on her back, the nervous laughter, the cold water on her feet, revived her as if it had just happened. "I don't know why that day came back," she told me, "but it was like a gift. It stayed with me for the rest of the week, and that's what we often forget. That memory doesn't just serve to function, it also serves to sustain us. Not everything that is forgotten hurts. Sometimes forgetting is a blessing. Sometimes letting go of a detail, a date, a wound is a form of healing. What have you forgotten that used to hurt? What old burdens have left without you needing to relive them? Maybe memory, when it becomes selective, is protecting us. Maybe it only keeps what we still need, what still touches our heart. The Stoics taught that we have no control over the past, but we do have control over how we remember it. And when those memories come, the sweet ones, the difficult ones, the confusing ones, we can choose how to receive them, with judgment or with tenderness. Maybe you don't remember everything, but what you remember, you do for a reason. And that, dear friend, is a treasure. Don't judge yourself for what slips away. Don't blame yourself for what you can't bring back to the present, because the value of your life isn't in the accuracy of the details, but in the emotion that remains etched. It's like when you open an old album and there are blurry photos. Some you don't even know where they were taken, but others look at you with a clarity that moves you, and it doesn't matter the year or the place. What matters is what they awaken. That's true memory, the one that holds, not the one that calculates. So if today your mind isn't as quick as before, if you forget little things, if you struggle to remember names but relive embraces, you're not failing. You're simply living with a different memory, a more emotional one, a more essential one. And you can nourish it with music, with smells, with small objects that bring back the big ones. A song from your youth, an old letter, a worn photo, a taste that connects you to your childhood. All of that is still alive. It's still yours. In the end, what the mind forgets, the soul remembers. And if you ever feel there are dark rooms in your memory, don't worry. There are still many lights on, and each one of them illuminates moments that made you who you are. Memory is not a straight line. It's an old house. And even if you can't enter all the rooms, just one is enough to remind you that your story is still alive. Seventh truth, the internal clock changes. There comes a time after 80 when you start noticing that time doesn't behave the same anymore. It's not the days that change. It's something more intimate, more profound. The body no longer follows the same rhythm. The mornings stretch out. The nights become lighter or denser, depending on the day, and the hours no longer run, they drag, or simply float. Rita, an 84-year-old woman, discovered this one early morning. She woke up at 4:30 a.m., as had been happening for months. She sat up in bed, looked at the still dark window and thought, again, so early. But it wasn't anxiety she felt. It was something else. It was as if her body spoke to her in a different voice, as if waking up so early wasn't an inconvenience, but an invitation. Until recently, Rita had followed strict schedules: alarm clock, breakfast at 8, walk at 10, nap at 2, dinner at 7. Everything measured, everything under control. But one day she noticed that her body no longer asked for permission. She'd feel sleepy at 6 p.m. Intense memories would come to her just as she closed her eyes to sleep. She woke up before dawn with clear thoughts and fresh emotions, and although at first she fought against this new way of living time, she later decided to listen to herself. In old age, time is no longer the same as before. Not just because there are fewer calendars ahead, but because the body changes rhythm, and with it the soul. What was once rush now becomes pause. What was once waiting now becomes contemplation. The hours feel deeper, fuller, or emptier, but never neutral. Has this happened to you lately? Have you noticed how the mornings feel eternal, but the afternoons disappear? Or that the clock shows one time, but your body tells you another? Perhaps it's no longer necessary to live by the clock. Maybe now time is measured in emotions, not minutes. Rita started to enjoy her early mornings. She'd make herself tea, write some memories, or simply listen to the silence. She discovered that she didn't have to wait for the world to wake up, that one could also live in that calm space where everything is on pause. No guilt, no rush. There's an ancient wisdom in this change. The Stoics said, "Nothing belongs to us except the present moment." And it's true. But for many older adults, this present comes without instructions. It comes with a new clock, one that can't be bought or programmed, one that asks to be attended to with care and patience. Sometimes the day becomes long. It stretches like an autumn shadow, and you don't quite know what to do with all that time. But other times the same day contracts. It passes without warning, and you're left wondering what you did, what you felt, who you called. It's the mystery of subjective time, of that internal clock that no longer responds to agendas, but to states of the soul. Have you ever asked yourself how often you live waiting for someone to call, waiting for a visitor, waiting for pain to pass, waiting for something to happen? And in the meantime, what do you do with that hour you have now? What would it be like to give yourself an hour of peace, without guilt, without rush, just for you? Living without hurry isn't about doing nothing. It's about starting to do things from a different place. It's about listening to the new rhythm the body proposes. It's about accepting that external clocks no longer dictate, that now it's time to choose what's worth it and what's not anymore. Rita started to organize her days, not by the clock, but by moments. She'd get up when her body asked. She'd walk if her mood allowed. She'd call someone when her heart desired it, and thus her life became truer, not more productive, not more useful, more hers. Because in old age, time stops being an urgency, and it becomes a gift that doesn't repeat, but can be savored. There's no need to fill every hour with activity. Sometimes all it takes is a comfortable chair, a hot cup, a song that brings memories. Sometimes all it takes is being, and that too is living. And when someone tells you you're wasting time, smile. Because only someone who doesn't understand the depth of your rhythm could think you're not making the most of every minute. At this stage, time is no longer a race. It's a river that flows more slowly, yes, but also more deeply. Its waters don't rush with anxiety. They carry history, they carry experience, they carry everything you've been and still are. Listen to your body, listen to your clock. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, you have permission to live on your terms, without explaining anything, without justifying yourself, just being, just flowing. And that, my friend, is also freedom. Eighth truth: the pain of anniversaries without those who are no longer here. On October 12th, Anna always buys white flowers. It's not just any date. That day would have been Ernesto's 87th birthday, her husband of 49 years. It's been 7 years since he passed. 7 years since the house became quieter, since the coffee in the morning tastes different, since birthdays are no longer celebrated the same way. But Anna still marks that day. She wakes up early, as always. She puts on a dress that he liked. She goes to the little neighborhood market and carefully picks the flowers. She gets home, lights a candle, and plays the soft music, the same music they used to listen to together on Sundays. Then she sits by the window with the flowers and a cup of tea and speaks to him softly. She tells him how she is, talks about the grandchildren, the knee that hurts, the neighbor who repainted the gate red. She tells him that she misses him. That's all she needs, because when you've truly loved, the important dates don't get forgotten. They are felt more strongly, they hurt differently, not because there was no farewell, but because love doesn't completely go away. There is something special and sometimes heartbreaking about anniversaries when someone is missing. The calendar announces them as always, but the heart already knows they won't be the same. Those days come with a particular silence, with a nostalgia that sinks deep into your bones. It's not sadness all day long. It's something deeper, more intimate, an invisible conversation between what was and what still is, even though they are no longer here. Has this ever happened to you? Is there a date that you can't forget, that tightens your chest before it arrives? Is there someone you still speak to in silence? Do you have a small ritual, a gesture, a way of not forgetting? The absence of those we love doesn't disappear with the years. It just changes form. It's no longer in the chair at the dining table, or in the voice that asked how you slept, or in the favorite dish you used to cook together. But it's somewhere else. It's in the memory, in the song playing on the radio, in the photo you haven't moved from its place. It's in you. Sometimes we think grief is something to be overcome, that it passes, but the truth is different. Grief doesn't disappear. It transforms. It settles inside us. It learns to live in silence. But there are days when it returns with strength. And many of those days have names: Christmas, anniversaries, birthdays, the date they passed. And that's not a sign of weakness. It's proof of love. There's no recipe for these days. Everyone lives them as they can. Some prefer to stay home, others gather with family, some go to the cemetery. And some, like Anna, simply buy flowers and sit down to remember. The Stoics said that what hurts us is not the loss, but the unresolved attachment. But they also said that the only thing truly ours is our attitude toward what we can't change, and death can't be changed. What we can do is choose how we live with absence, what place we give it in our lives. Not to hold on, but to honor. Not to remain trapped in the past, but to move forward without forgetting where we came from, who we loved, what marked us forever. Anna doesn't talk about Ernesto every day, but every time someone mentions his name, she smiles. Not with sadness, but with a tenderness that only years can give, because true love never completely disappears. It stays. It changes form, yes, but it stays. The next time an important date comes and you feel your chest tighten, don't avoid it. Don't feel weak for crying. Don't force yourself to be fine. Maybe the best thing you can do is allow yourself to feel, to remember, to say the name of the one who's gone, to speak to them softly, light a candle, make that meal they loved, or simply stay quiet for a while in the company of that absence, which is also part of your story, because absence hurts, but it also holds you when it becomes inner presence. You're not alone in this. We all, in one way or another, carry our empty chairs in our hearts. And even if they are not visible, even if no one mentions them, they're there. Sometimes they weigh. Other times, surprisingly, they comfort. As one writer said, grief is not overcome, it is walked. And on that walk, every anniversary, every date is a station. Some hurt more than others, but they all deserve to be walked with love. And if today you are on one of those dates, I embrace you from here. Because there are no magic words, just deep respect for what you feel. Anna, every October 12th, places a flower on the chair where Ernesto used to sit. She doesn't talk about it with everyone. She doesn't seek comfort. She simply honors him. And that's enough, because some empty chairs still have names. Fifth truth, the subtle fear of depending on others. Sometimes it's not said with words, but you feel it in your body, in the way you avoid asking for something, in that "don't worry, I can do it alone" that comes out almost automatically, even when it's not true. It's the fear, quiet but constant, of depending. It doesn't appear all at once. It comes in small, everyday scenes, when it becomes harder to climb that step, when opening a jar takes more strength than you have left, when carrying shopping bags leaves your arms shaking, and yet there you are, resisting, saying "I'm fine," with a smile that tries to hide the discomfort. Why is it so hard to ask for help? It's not just pride, it's fear. Fear of being a burden, fear of no longer being independent, fear that the love you receive will come with pity, fear of losing control of your own life. Luis, 84 years old, lived it like this. His whole life, he was the one who solved problems, who carried the heavy boxes, who drove at night when others were tired. His wife used to say that Luis had strength even in his gaze. But a couple of years ago, things changed. He found it harder to walk, his reflexes weren't the same, and he had to stop driving. One day at the supermarket, he tried to lift a box of water and ended up with a pulled-back muscle. He didn't ask for help, he didn't want to. He preferred to grit his teeth and get home bent over. "I don't want to bother," he later told his daughter, who found him quietly applying ointment. She looked at him with tenderness. "Dad, letting me help you is not a bother. It's a privilege." Luis was silent. No one had ever told him that before. That was the beginning of a deep change. It wasn't immediate. Learning to receive takes time. But little by little, Luis began to let himself be cared for. He accepted that someone would accompany him to the doctor, that they would cook for him, that they would wait for him at the end of his daily walk in case he got tired. And over time, he discovered something unexpected. Receiving is also a way of giving, because when someone cares for you, they also feel useful. When you give someone the opportunity to help you, you're saying, "I trust you." Do you struggle to ask for help? Who would you ask if you weren't afraid? Getting older shouldn't mean isolation or a solitary struggle, but we live in a world that taught us to measure our worth by what we can do alone. As if depending on others were synonymous with failing. As if needing help were a cause for shame. But it's not. Everyone at some point in life needs support. You needed it when you were born. You needed it when you cried over a loss. You needed it when your body didn't respond like it used to. And that's okay, because that doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Dignity is not in doing everything alone. It's in living authentically, in recognizing your limits without shame, in accepting help with gratitude, not guilt. And yes, at first, it's uncomfortable, because there's a pride that's hard to let go of, because we fear that others will see us as fragile. But the truth is, asking for help is also an act of bravery. It's looking at another person and saying, "I need you," and that instead of distancing us, brings us closer. There's a Stoic teaching that says self-sufficiency does not mean needing no one, but knowing wisely when to rely on others without losing yourself. That's the key, not letting the fear of depending steal your peace. Because depending on others doesn't mean you've lost your value. It means you're alive, you're moving forward with support. You choose the path of humility and shared love, rather than forced silence because of pride. What if you changed the question? Instead of thinking, "How do I avoid bothering someone?" you could ask yourself, "What's stopping me from letting myself be cared for with love?" Love isn't only given, it's also received. When someone who loves you wants to help, they don't do it out of pity. They do it from the bond, from the gratitude of having you, from the desire to be near you, to share, to ease your journey, even if it's just a little. Luis now says that his mornings are more peaceful since he accepted that his grandson helps him prepare breakfast on Saturdays. Not because he couldn't do it alone, but because now he understands that that shared moment, that conversation between toast and laughter, is worth more than any forced independence. It's not about resigning, it's about making space for mutual care, because in the end we all need each other, and allowing that doesn't take away our dignity, it gives it back. Imagine a plant in a forgotten pot. It's alive, it resists, but it starts to wither from within. It doesn't ask for water, it can't, but it still needs it. That's how the soul can feel when we stop receiving. Remember this, you deserve help. Without conditions, without explanations, without guilt. The body changes, strength fluctuates, life takes turns, But the value you have doesn't diminish with the years, and asking for support is not a burden for those who love you. It's a gesture of trust, of connection, of humanity. So the next time you need something, don't say, "Don't worry." Say, "Can you help me, please?" And you'll see how something changes in you and in others too, because like a quiet plant that blooms when watered, your soul can also bloom when it allows itself to receive. 10th truth, the value of silence, and its weight too. Sometimes the day starts without a single good morning. It's not that something is wrong, it's just that, with time, the house has become quieter. The clocks keep ticking, the coffee machine makes its usual noise every morning, and the birds sing a little when the window opens, but no human voice sounds. Not a laugh, not a question, not a "How did you sleep today?" This is how Clara's day begins, 86 years old, widowed for nearly a decade. Her children live far away. Her grandchildren call her, of course, but with more space between calls. It's not neglect, it's life, their lives. And so, Clara has breakfast alone, waters her plants, looks out the window. She turns on the radio, but sometimes turns it off shortly after. Not because she minds the sound, but because she prefers that other noise, the more subtle one, the one that comes from silence. The same silence that for years weighed on her, and now she has learned to look at it with new eyes. But that didn't happen overnight. At first, silence was a reminder of all that was no longer there, of her husband, who used to hum while making coffee, of the voices of her children running around the house, of afternoons full of conversation. It was an echo of what was lost, a mirror that showed absence, not presence. There were days when Clara turned on the television just so she wouldn't feel alone. She didn't watch it. She just wanted something to make noise so the walls wouldn't become so thick with that tight silence. But over time, Clara started to notice something else. She started to hear something different. In that same silence, there was something more than absence. There was space. There was presence of herself, of her thoughts, of her soul, perhaps. One day, while knitting in her favorite armchair, she realized that she didn't feel alone, not because someone was with her, but because she didn't need anyone at that moment. The silence wrapped her up. It contained her. It gave her a break from the noise of the world. She felt accompanied by her own company. That's when silence stopped being an enemy and became an ally. But it must be said honestly, silence has two faces. It can be soothing or it can be a burden. There are days when it heals and others when it hurts, because not all silence is chosen. There's one that comes when you decide to turn off your phone, close your eyes, and breathe deeply. That one can calm you, help you think, even heal. But then there's the other, the one that falls without being asked for, the one that comes when you were expecting a call, but it didn't ring. The one that floods a house where the laughter of before no longer sounds. That silence settles like a shadow, and sometimes it weighs more than 1,000 words. Have you ever felt that? Have you noticed how silence changes depending on the day? Do you remember the last time you experienced it as company? And when did you feel it as emptiness? The difference is not always in the volume, but in the soul. Stoicism has something to say about this. It teaches that we don't control what comes, but we do control how we face it. And with silence, that is deeply true. You don't always choose if you'll be alone, but you can choose what you'll do with that silence. Clara did. She started using that space to write small thoughts in a notebook. They weren't journals or memories. They were fragments. Memories that came to her mind unexpectedly. Ideas that crossed her soul while the world outside moved at a different speed. "I don't need to talk to exist," she would say sometimes. "I can listen to myself, and that matters too." That doesn't mean she stopped missing him. She misses him. Of course. Her husband's hug. The noisy meals. The spontaneous conversations. But now she knows that she can live in peace with the silence. That she can look at it without fear. Because silence can also be a refuge. A sacred pause. An inner room where you can finally hear yourself without interruptions. Some people fear silence because they think it's empty, but often the emptiness isn't out there. It's in the way we relate to ourselves. When we learn to inhabit it, that silence can become fertile. It can give us answers that noise never allowed us to hear. And with the years, life teaches us to speak less and understand more. Have you given yourself that space? Or do you still fill every corner with noise just to avoid feeling the lack? Sometimes a conversation with yourself is more powerful than any superficial chat. Sometimes an afternoon of silence is worth more than 1,000 meaningless activities. But be careful. Don't let silence turn into isolation. Don't let it take away your ability to connect. Use it as a tool for peace. Yes. As a prison, no. If you feel that silence starts weighing more than healing, talk about it. Write it. Seek someone. It's not about avoiding silence, but not letting it become forgetting. Remember this. You are here, and that's already enough reason to be heard, even in silence. Because silence, when embraced, can be like a warm room where the soul listens to itself for the first time in a long time. 11th truth, the surprise of continuing to learn. There is a silent belief, installed unknowingly, that after a certain age everything has already been said, that you've already learned what you needed to learn, that there are no more first times, that life becomes repetition. But the truth is that the soul doesn't know retirement. It remains awake, restless, still absorbing, even especially after 80. Not everyone believes this until they live it. Let me introduce you to Raphael, 84 years old, widower, retired for years, with a life full of stories and certainties. He was always a man of firm ideas, clear opinions, one of those who seemed to have an answer for everything. His children even joked that there was no way to change his mind. Until one afternoon, in front of a cup of coffee and a chat with his 19-year-old granddaughter, something changed. She was telling him about a book she was reading, about compassion. She told him how she had learned that sometimes helping isn't giving advice, but simply listening. Raphael listened silently, as if trying to recall something distant, and then, almost without thinking, he said, "I think I spent many years giving advice, when maybe I should have just listened." His granddaughter looked at him surprised. Raphael, too. He had never said something like that before. It was as if, in that moment, a new truth had come to his soul, and it didn't hurt. On the contrary, it freed him. At 84, Raphael had just learned a new lesson. That night, he didn't fall asleep right away. He thought. He remembered. He wondered how many times his wife had spoken to him not to solve something, but to feel accompanied. How many times his children had needed a hug instead of a sermon. And he didn't judge himself harshly, but with honesty, because at that moment he understood something new. There is always space to change, even if one has lived a lot. Has something like this ever happened to you? Have you felt that something new surprised you, just when you thought everything was already written? Old age is not a barren land. It is rather a mature soil, where each seed falls with more meaning. What changes is not the ability to learn, but the way that learning settles. It no longer enters in a rush, but with depth. It's no longer sought out of duty, but out of desire. And yes, one can discover something at 80 that they didn't know at 30. An emotion, a perspective, a forgiveness, a new pleasure, a truth that used to hurt and now heals. Maybe you discover that the patience you didn't have before now embraces you, or that the fear that used to guide you no longer has so much power, or that someone you judged harshly was actually just asking for love. Every experience lived has something to teach us, even when we already thought we were experts in life. And there's the secret, in never ceasing to be a student, because life, even in its final chapters, still speaks to us, sometimes loudly with unexpected events, sometimes in whispers, with small daily signs. But it always tells us something. It always has something to show us. And you? What is the last thing you learned about yourself? Was there an emotion that surprised you, an opinion you changed, a gesture you made without expecting it? Being able to surprise yourself is one of the most beautiful proofs that we are alive. Many believe that old age is just a period of closure. But no, it is also an opening of ideas, of views, of inner paths. It's when you can look back with more calm and inward with more clarity. It's when you no longer need to be right, but to live with meaning. Raphael, after that conversation with his granddaughter, started doing something he had never done before. Truly listening, with attention, with pause, without interrupting. And he discovered something precious. By stopping trying to teach so much, he started learning more. He learned from the tone with which his children spoke to him, from the stories of his neighbor, from the silences his granddaughter shared without words. He realized that wisdom is not always in speaking, but in observing, in feeling, in being present. That was his new lesson. And every time someone visited him, he would say with a smile, "At my age, I'm still growing." The humility of someone who knows they don't know everything. The maturity of someone who accepts that living is continuing to learn. And you? What would you like to learn now? What do you still need to say, feel, or understand? It's never too late for one more lesson. No, discovery is useless, no matter how small it seems. Life doesn't fade with the years. It deepens, it becomes wiser, and sometimes it's even more surprising. Perhaps without even realizing it, you're blooming right now, like a flower that still opens petals under the sun, even though many thought it wouldn't. 12th truth, the wisdom that is no longer shouted, only offered. As time passes, one stops talking so much. Not because there's nothing left to say, but because one has learned that not everything has to be said out loud. Old age, if lived consciously, teaches something that the rush of youth doesn't allow. True wisdom doesn't need to be imposed. It is simply offered, like someone leaving a ripe fruit on the table and stepping back in silence, knowing that whoever needs it will take it. Clara is 86 years old. For decades, she was a teacher, mother, wife, friend, advisor, a strong woman, with character, with words always ready. But now, her way of being in the world is different. Not because she lacks opinions, but because she learned that many times the deepest truths don't impose themselves. They are given. Recently, her 22-year-old grandson, Tomas, visited her. He was going through a relationship crisis. He arrived agitated, with a furrowed brow, full of certainties and complaints. He talked for more than an hour. Clara listened to everything, without interrupting, without correcting, without rushing. When he finished, Tomas asked her, "Grandma, what would you do?" Clara looked at him with tenderness. She took his hand, and with a soft voice, almost as if not wanting to break the stillness, she said, "I would stop running and start looking." That was it. She didn't give him a list of advice. She didn't analyze the situation. She simply shared a simple truth, born from experience. And although Tomas thought it was little at the moment, those words came back to him days later, like a soft echo that doesn't disappear. That is the power of wisdom that is not shouted, With the years, one understands that the most valuable thing is not to be right, but to offer calm. That many times a shared story, a sincere glance, a simple sentence are worth more than 1,000 explanations. Has this happened to you? Have you felt that over time your words weigh more even when they are fewer? There is a serene strength in those who no longer need to convince, in those who simply live their truth and offer it like someone offering warmth on a cold night, with generosity, expecting nothing in return. That is the wisdom born from having lived, from having failed, forgiven, lost, loved. A wisdom that no longer needs to be recognized or applauded. It only needs to be shared when the other is ready to receive it. And many times there's no need to speak. The silent testimony of someone who walks with coherence, who lives in peace with their decisions, who radiates calm even in uncertainty, is more eloquent than any speech. Because in the end, one realizes that example is more powerful than instruction. And what wisdom do you carry inside that you haven't shared yet? Is there a truth that life taught you that you hold as a treasure? Maybe you didn't share it because you thought it didn't matter, or that no one wanted to hear it, but I assure you that your experience has value, even if no one asks for it, even if it seems that there are no attentive ears. Because sometimes the right word comes when the other needs it most. Not before, not after. Exactly when the heart opens. The Stoics taught that we should live with virtue, not to be admired, but to be whole. That the good life is not the one that seeks recognition, but the one that acts in harmony with what is essential. Seneca wrote that the wise do not worry about appearing wise, but about living in harmony with nature, and that includes living with honesty, temperance, humility, even if no one notices. That is the beauty of this stage of life. There is no need to prove anything, only to be. Clara doesn't seek to be listened to like before. She doesn't expect people to follow her or repeat her words. She simply offers, from the silence, what she has learned with her soul. And when someone approaches with an open heart, she is ready to share, not from authority, but from love. Her house smells of freshly made tea and quiet wisdom. She doesn't preach, she doesn't correct, but every gesture, every pause, every smile teaches something, her. Grandson, days later, returned and said, "Grandma, I understood what you wanted to tell me. I'm learning to look." Clara simply nodded. There was no need to say anything more. Sometimes the greatest teaching is simply being. And just like Clara, you also have candles lit inside, light that doesn't make noise, but that illuminates. With every story you've lived, with every decision you've made, with every mistake you've learned from, you've accumulated a soft yet constant flame. Maybe the world no longer asks you to speak loudly, but that doesn't mean you don't have something valuable to say. And when the time comes, when someone approaches with an open soul, let your truth come out, without imposing itself, like a lit candle in the middle of the night, not blinding, not burning, but accompanying, giving warmth, giving direction, because that is the wisdom of this stage, not shouting, but offering, and that is much more powerful than it seems. 13th truth, patience as a survival tool. There is something that changes silently after 80, the relationship with time. You no longer rush to catch up, no longer push to arrive. You start to wait, but not with anxiety, rather with a different calm, wiser, deeper. At first, it may seem strange, waiting without despair, trusting that things will come without forcing them. But the truth is, life, with the passage of years, shows you that hurry almost never brings peace, and that patience, that often disregarded, a virtue, becomes a true survival tool. Carlos is 84 years old. He's always been an active man, decisive, one of those who prefer doing overthinking. But with the years, his body began to set a different rhythm, slower, more deliberate. At first, he resisted. He became frustrated for not being able to do things as fast as before. But there was a moment that changed his perspective. His daughter Laura was going through a difficult divorce. Carlos wanted to help her, advise her, do something to ease her pain. But every time he tried to say something, she avoided him, closing herself off in her world. For weeks, he insisted, searched for words, tried to convince her to listen. Until one day, he decided to simply wait. He began to leave short messages. "I'm here if you need me." Nothing more. He didn't push. He didn't judge. And little by little, Laura began to come closer, first with a call, then with a visit. One day, without him expecting it, she sat beside him and said, "Thank you for not pushing me, for waiting for me at my own pace." And Carlos understood. Sometimes patience is not passivity. It's love without hurry. Have you ever felt that way? Have you had to wait for someone or for yourself? Patience is not just a nice virtue to quote in a book. It's an emotional muscle that's trained with life, especially in old age, when so many things no longer depend on you, when the body changes, when children make their decisions, when the world seems to move at a different speed. That's where patience becomes an ally, not to resign but to accept, to not fight against every little setback, to understand that not everything is resolved instantly, that some pains need time, that some answers come when the heart is ready, not when the clock says so. And it's not always easy. There are days when the waiting is heavy, when one would like to have the strength of before, the clarity of before, the movement of before. But there are also days when one discovers that by waiting without distress, something inside falls into place. What are you waiting for today? And with what things have you finally made peace? Maybe with the body that no longer responds the same, with friends who are no longer around, with children who live far away, with plans that were not fulfilled, and still you're here, waiting without giving up, letting go without losing hope, living without urgency. There is a deep wisdom in knowing when to insist and when to let go. When a conversation is worth having, and when silence is more loving, when it's worth pushing, and when it's wiser to rest. The Stoics spoke a lot about this, acting where one has power and letting go where one doesn't. Epictetus said, "Do not worry about what does not depend on you. Focus on what does." And in old age, this teaching becomes urgent, because there's so much we no longer control, but there's still so much we do. Patience doesn't mean giving up on what you dream of. It means caring for your energy. It means understanding that you don't need to prove anything, nor chase after anyone, that your time has value, even if it's slower, that your peace matters, even if others don't understand it. Carlos, with his patient silence, not only saved his relationship with his daughter, he also learned to wait better in other areas of his life. He no longer gets frustrated when his body asks for more rest. He doesn't get angry when he forgets something. He doesn't panic if the phone doesn't ring. He's learned to bloom at a different pace, and that's also part of the art of aging, understanding that life keeps bearing fruit, even if it's slower. Because yes, you can still bloom, like a tree that isn't in a hurry, that seems dormant in winter, but in silence is preparing for its new bloom, that doesn't compete with the rest of the forest, that simply follows its cycle, steady, patient, alive. You are also blooming, even if it doesn't seem like it, even if what you're cultivating now isn't visible from the outside. Every day you choose to wait calmly, let go with love, rest without guilt. You're nurturing your roots, and that's enough. Don't let anyone tell you it's too late, that there's nothing left to wait for. Life still offers lessons, comfort, surprises, even after 80. So, if today you're waiting for something, a word, an answer, healing, company, do it without hurry, with patience, with dignity. with confidence. The tree doesn't rush its bloom, and yet it blooms. 14th truth, the importance of simple rituals. After 80, many things change, the rhythm of the body, the company, the plans for the future. But there is something that remains, and sometimes becomes more important than ever. Rituals. Those everyday gestures that seem small, but that hold the soul like an invisible thread that keeps life together. We're not talking about grand ceremonies. We're talking about something as simple as heating water for coffee, making the bed carefully each morning, opening the window and looking at the sky for a few minutes before starting the day. Small actions that are repeated and that, without us noticing, give us structure, calm, meaning. Let me tell you about Clara. She's 87 years old and has lived alone for over a decade. Her body no longer allows her to move as freely as before, and outings are becoming more spaced out. But every morning, at the same time, she puts on her shawl, sits by the window, and with her steaming cup of tea in her hands, she watches the sun rise over the rooftops of the neighborhood. There's no rush, there's no noise. Just that intimate ceremony between her, the light, and the silence. "If one day I don't do this," she once told me, "I feel like the day hasn't started well. It's like I don't have any ground beneath me." And that's what rituals are: ground, base, shelter. At a stage when so many things get disordered, the body, the memories, the relationships, rituals are anchors. They remind us that there's still something we can choose, something we can do with our own hands, that there's still order in the chaos. Do you have a ritual that holds you up, a daily gesture that, even though it's small, brings you peace? Maybe it's caring for a plant, reading a passage from a book every afternoon, writing a few lines in a notebook, or simply sitting in the same place, in silence, at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how simple it seems. If it brings you calm, it's sacred. And that's the key, understanding that the everyday can also be sacred. We live in a world that overvalues the extraordinary, the great achievements, the travels, the moments that seem like they're from a movie. But life, the real one, the one that holds us up, is built on the simple. Breakfast served with love, a conversation in the middle of the afternoon, the ritual of sweeping the sidewalk while greeting the neighbor. Those small things are not empty routine. They are emotional columns. There are people who, after 80, feel disoriented, not just because of what they've lost, but because they no longer have those everyday threads that gave them meaning. The structure disappears, and with it, the sense of being at home within oneself. That's why recovering rituals can be a way of healing, of returning to oneself. What habit would you like to recover? That walk after lunch, that prayer before bed, the soft music at dusk? Sometimes we think it's too late to resume certain things, but it's not. As long as you're here, as long as you have one more day ahead, you can return to what brings you calm, to what reminds you who you are, even when the outside world has changed so much. There's wisdom in rituals that transcends age. The Stoics talked a lot about the value of daily discipline, not as rigid imposition, but as a form of inner freedom. Do what you must, even if it's small, and do it well, they said. Because in those repeated acts done with attention and character, peace and consistency are built, and this applies perfectly to this stage of life. You don't need to do much, but you do need to do something with presence, with soul. Clara, for example, doesn't need to talk to anyone to feel like her morning has meaning. Her ritual with tea, the light, the window, is her way of anchoring the day. As if saying to life, I'm here, present, attentive, grateful. And when the routine becomes smaller, more intimate, those gestures become even more powerful. Because there are no distractions, there are no urgencies, there is space for the deep. Have you stopped to think about what small rituals mark your days? Do you do them in a hurry, out of habit, or with consciousness, with affection? Maybe today is a good moment to choose one. Not to add obligations to your day, but to give your soul a gift. A gesture you repeat not out of obligation, but because it reminds you that you're alive, that your life still has form, rhythm, and direction. A lighthouse doesn't need to be big to guide, it just needs to stay lit. That's what rituals are, small lights that guide even when everything else is dark. And you don't need more. Just a warm cup in your hands, a greeting to the sun, a flower in a pot, a deep sigh in front of the window, and you already have an anchor for the day. Small gestures, big roots, 15th truth, the silent legacy you leave every day. Many believe that leaving a legacy means accumulating possessions, signing deeds, securing inheritances, that at the end of life what remains is money, land, properties. But with the years, one discovers something deeper, more real, that the true legacy is written in the memory of others, not in their bank accounts. And the most surprising thing is that this legacy begins to be built long before one departs. It is left in the details, in every word, every gesture, every decision, in the way we treat others, in how we face life, in what we teach without realizing it. Let me tell you about Don Raimundo. He had no fortune. He never owned a house. He lived in a small rented apartment with his old books, his faithful radio, and his steaming kettle. He was a primary school teacher, and for almost 40 years he taught children to read. Children who today are doctors, construction workers, mothers, merchants. He never sought recognition, but when he passed away, his former students filled the church. Some traveled hundreds of kilometers just to say goodbye. One of them, in tears, said something that everyone remembered. He didn't just teach us to read, he taught us to be people. Don Raimundo did not leave material inheritances, but he left a living mark in every heart he touched. And that legacy, the one that cannot be measured in coins or titles, keeps beating every time one of his students tells a story, teaches with patience, or chooses to act with integrity. Do you see? The way you live today is leaving a mark. Even if you don't notice it, there are people observing you, listening to you, learning from you. Sometimes it's your children, sometimes your grandchildren, or perhaps a neighbor, a friend, someone who was inspired by one of your phrases or by your way of looking at life. What would you like people to say about you when you are no longer here? That you were generous, that you lived with integrity, that you left love instead of resentment. We all sow something, even in silence. The question is, what are you sowing today? Because you don't need to have much to leave much. Sometimes a story told at just the right moment can change someone's path. Sometimes choosing forgiveness instead of pride is what remains in the memory of those around you. Legacy is not something drafted at the end, like a will. It is something forged daily, without applause, without witnesses. The Stoics were clear about this. The greatest inheritance you can leave is your virtue, your temperance, your wisdom, your way of acting when no one sees you. Because that spreads, is imitated, is remembered. That is the inheritance that does not rust, does not devalue, does not disappear, and you build it without needing titles or fortunes. Think for a moment, what values have you defended all your life? What were you never willing to give up? What are you proud of today? All of that is also part of your legacy, even if you don't write it on paper, even if no one names it aloud, and if there is still something you would like to pass on, a lesson, a story, an idea you feel is valuable. It is never too late to do it. Perhaps you could write a letter, record an audio, have a conversation with someone who matters to you. There is no need to wait for a solemn moment. Sometimes a chat over coffee can be more meaningful than any official act, because when one leaves this world, nothing is taken, but much is left behind. One leaves their way of loving, One leaves their silences. One leaves the times they listened without judging. One leaves the times they chose to be honest, even when no one demanded it. That is the echo of a life well lived, a life that even if it was simple, left roots, a life that even if it never made headlines, filled souls. And you, every day, are leaving something of yourself in others. You leave it in the eyes of those who listen to you, in the attitude of those who imitate you, in the memory of those who loved you. Sometimes we believe we no longer have anything to offer, but that is not true. As long as you are here, your experience has value, your presence inspires, your way of seeing the world can help others find meaning, calm, direction. That is why you should not underestimate your journey. Do not think you have no legacy just because you have no wealth. Perhaps the most valuable thing you have built is not in your hands, but in the marks you have left in other lives. In the end, the true testament is not signed with ink. It is engraved in the memory of those who crossed paths with you. And that remains. If you've made it this far, it's no coincidence. It means you allow yourself to look at life with more depth, without denying what is difficult, but also without losing what is valuable. We have walked together through truths that hurt, that surprise, and that also heal. From the silence that weighs to the body that changes. From the rituals that sustain to that silent legacy you leave without realizing it. And now I want to ask you, which of these truths touched something in you? What did you discover about your life, your story, yourself? If any word in this series resonated with you, I invite you not to leave it only in thought. Comment below with the phrase, "I keep leaving a mark," and tell me from where you are listening. I would love to know who is walking with me on this journey of introspection, truth, and wisdom. And if you felt this content accompanied you, don't leave without subscribing and turning on the notification bell. Here, every video is an opportunity to grow, reflect, and live with more calm, meaning, and freedom. I want you to be part of this community that does not fear aging, because it knows that in every wrinkle there is also a sacred story. And please share this video with someone who needs it. Sometimes a single phrase can change someone's week or even their life when they are going through a difficult stage. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening with your heart. Thank you for continuing to build every day that slower, wiser, and more authentic life. See you in the next video. Until then, take care of your soul as you care for a flower, with constancy, with tenderness, with presence, because your story is still being written.